Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CISL seminar. Today we have Daniel Howard talking about building a culture of research software engineering. Many of us already know Daniel, but I'll give a brief introduction for those of you who aren't as familiar. He is an HPC consultant here in CISL, and he's been here since 2021. Previously, Daniel worked on GPU development efforts at NREL Wave Watch program and studied monsoon dynamics at Notre Dame. With a background in applied mathematics and computational science, Daniel is passionate about furthering Earth system science through best practices in research software engineering, as well as use of compute-efficient mathematical tool sets deployed on modern computing hardware, such as those as GPU processors. So, welcome, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. So yes, I'm Daniel Howard. I'll be speaking to you today about building a culture of research software engineering, also known as RSE, if you've not heard of the acronym yet. Hopefully you'll learn a lot more about that today. I'll focus a lot on the US RSE organization, but we'll just start out a little bit on what is research software engineering. So this movement and term was born in the UK around 2012 through the Software Sustainability Institute, and there's a collaborations workshop that's held at the time. And that following year, there's the UK RSE Association that formed with about 50 members. After that, that's now burgeoned out into like multiple other organizations internationally. And the US organization actually started in around 2017. But today, we actually have around currently membership of 2,500 plus members, at least within US RSE membership. I do not know what the actual international membership is, but there are plenty of folks around the world now that are very much acknowledging and wanting to further the issues needed within the research software engineering community, specifically that caters towards the research enterprise rather than industrial software engineering issues. So specifically, RSE is meant to specifically lead and facilitate development in software for research purposes. So this includes like managing complex code bases, doing the typical development and optimization tests and validation of said codes in that space, and promoting best practices in software development. How do we make our lives easier for us as RSEs supporting scientists' work, as well as how can scientists do their work better with improved software engineering practices? The main difference between RSE kind of like issues versus standard software engineering is just the need to adapt to often frequently changing and fluid requirements of research projects. It's a much different environment to have to navigate compared to that you might find in standard industry projects where requirements and expectations are typically more clearly defined and have different types of leadership and ways in which that projects are managed. Nowadays, scientists that tend to like lead the projects, but oftentimes scientists don't necessarily have a software engineering background. So that can sometimes hinder the efforts and goals of software that enables a lot of the science of today. RSE can also include research within software engineering in and of itself, but also through that collaboration with domain sciences. And so practitioners can include software engineers that identify themselves as RSEs, as well as sysadmins or other folks that support the cyber infrastructure that we all work on. And I would also heavily include the domain scientists themselves who may have picked up various degrees of software engineering skills and work over the years, but still may or may not have formal software engineering training. So again, you might have typical software engineering kind of like spectrum where you might fall here. You can identify yourself where you might be. Maybe you came from a kind of like a CS more background, so maybe more on the left side, but maybe you also came from a more domain-specific background and you end up liking software engineering over time and kind of shifted in the middle. And so certain people get into this field in terms of just having different backgrounds, and as part of the USRC, we like to be inclusive towards the definition of what that exactly means. There's other ways to even think about that further. If Dan Katz liked to recognize this idea of a super RSE, so folks that even go a little bit further and not just within like supporting research, but also doing research and support within like the computer science space itself of how do we engender best practices of research software engineering towards understanding generalizability, maintainability, sustainability of research products, and how they interact with effectively through the research software enterprise to make sure that effectively furthers science to the way that makes it most usable, reproducible, and engages with the goals that the scientific enterprises wants to attain. So why is our research software engineering important? Presently, there more and more of our research today is dependent on software. About more than 90% of U.S. researchers today use research software in some various form, according to various studies. And 65% state, about 65% state that their research would not be practical without said software. In saying that the same, many scientists will then develop their own software, but then 21% of those don't even have any training in software engineering. So there are significant researchers within the space that are using and even developing their own software, but don't necessarily have the skills or resources to engage in that in a meaningful process. Another aspect to consider is the way in which it's discussed in funding and grant models. At least per a analysis done in 2017, over that past decade, there's 20% of NSF projects will discuss software engineering explicitly in their abstracts, and that represents about a $10 billion amount of research that's being funded that is directly, at least making direct connections to software engineering as part of its work. And within the Department of Energy, the Exascale Computing Project, ECP, 2 or 3 of those were specifically focused on research software, which is about $4 billion of that budget for the ECP project. Additionally, in terms of publications, majority of publications now have research software components. The most cited papers tend to be ones that are methods and software focused, and there tend to be better rates of citation as well if they're well documented and reproducible. So there's an investment and value towards making sure that software that gets attached to publications is in fact done well through better documentation practices, ways in which we're supporting researchers towards doing that in a meaningful way. So much so now that multiple journals, including AGU, for example, now require that code data has to be fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible. So there's articles you could look at in terms of the space. There's a Nature Career Q&A article, why science needs more of RSCs. And one of the main points that the author kind of came away in that article was they want to see RSCs more as equals in the academic environment. So how can we level the playing field in terms of making sure that RSCs can effectively contribute to the scientific enterprise such that their expertise and knowledge best advances science in a way that serves the goals of science by their contributions of best practices in software engineering, while also learning how to collaborate effectively with those domain science experts that may, in the present moment, have more leadership of said projects and thus may not be including software engineering kind of priorities and concerns from the get-go because of that disparity in hierarchy that's often cited within current research enterprises. So something to emphasize, software enables science. It's paramount that we establish sound and sustainable strategies to do this effectively. And in doing this then allows us to be more competitive with other science agencies and work, and such that we want to be able to attract meaningful talent to do the work that NSF, for example, wants to do effectively. Researchers will want to go where their science and thus the software that they use to perform the science is well supported. And thus then we need meaningful RSC resources and talent to make sure that those scientists feel supported and have the resources that they need to do their daily work. In recognizing that, NCAR recently, hopefully you recall from the CISL Collab and Connect Week and other discussions around the labs, has initiated work within the SEAL initiative, the Software Engineering Across Labs. So this is seeking out interest in increasing, promoting effective development and usability of research software products. Some of the themes that they're focusing on currently is strategies we would like to focus on and develop on effective software development, improving development practices across the organization, and how do we encourage adoption of said practices, facilitating and creating teams of teams and co-design approaches towards working together, collaborating effectively within software space. And then, as well as then increasing agency for software engineers and workforce development, such that we're effectively able to retain and train and keep inclusive the RSC environment for folks that are doing work in that space. If you want to learn more, I encourage you to review Gary Granger's talk on this. And emphasizing that the QR code on the bottom right of all these slides does link to this. So if you want to go to any of the links here to the talk, I highly encourage that, as this will be very much an opportunity for you to learn more about what most interests you in terms of ways in which you can engage in research software engineering. So there are many organizations actually that do RSC type work. Personally, I'll focus throughout most of this talk on the US RSC organization. But that came out of the UK one, which is originally back in 2012, now known as the Society of Research Software Engineering. And there's now an International Council of RSC associations. So if you're interested in leadership engagement in that sense, you might say engage with that group and learn exactly what they're doing in terms of coordinating work across the globe in this RSC space. There are also other institutions that have engaged in this work before US RSC existed as a concept or even term. So that includes the Software Sustainability Institute in the UK, which then led to the US Sustainability Institute of the same, as well as the Research Software Alliance, VISA. That is also in the UK. I've personally engaged with some of those groups, at least getting their newsletters, and occasionally will read them. And so it's even though obviously I don't have too many connections with the UK, but nonetheless, they are valuable places to at least engage with and meet your colleagues and learn about other opportunities and expertise from different places you might not otherwise have access to. Beyond that, there are other organizations that were not necessarily created for RSCs, but do support the work that we might be interested in. So for example, through the ECP and DOE kind of projects, there's the IDEAS Productivity project, the interoperable design of extreme scale application software. And within that there was a Better Scientific Software project. So those communities were curating and offering webinars and resources for how do we develop better scientific software, and I encourage you to explore those as you might be interested in. There's also the Science Gateways Communities Institute. So how do we create user experience interfaces and such that we're making data and science and other work accessible to folks that may not have some of the technical knowledge to navigate some of the coding platforms are the same. So they have some great resources and ways in which to offer training for folks seeking to improve their usability of their science data and products. There's also groups that have focused on other specific topics or created coalitions of folks that are just seeking to support each other. So there's the Diverse program that does DEI type work within RSC. There's also the CARC, Campus Research Computing Consortium, and the Campus Champions and Access programs. They are related to each other in terms of building out community of folks to support each other, and typically within the campus and university ecosystem for how do we support research and computing data professionals. One program of interest perhaps to many folks at NCAR would be the ESIP Fed program. That's the Earth Science Information Partners. So if you work more in the data domain and such, they are a great resource for connecting with others that might have similar interests as yours. There's also training organizations like the Carpentries that offer lots of resources for how do we bring forth and develop skills in software engineering best practices. Then there's also the Software Engineering for Science organization. There's I think that's out of the University of Texas. They have a group that just does kind of research into best practices around meta science of software engineering. So if you're interested in kind of that aspect of approach, that can be of interest. And then lastly, there's the Ask Cyber Infrastructure, ask.ci. That's more of a community forum, particularly originally within the HPC community, but offers ways in which for you to engage and collaborate with folks and offer advice, suggestions, learn from each other about issues you might be coming up with, and seek out advice and support from your community in a virtual platform. As I said, there's many of these organizations. You're welcome to explore them as you're interested in, but I'll focus predominantly on the USRSC organization. So the USRSC is a community-driven organization. It is in fact free to join. It's still free. It's been generously funded so far by the Alpha P Slow Foundation and now community initiatives to enable that. So if you're interested in joining, feel free to join. There's an excellent Slack space that people very much engage and have a lot of activity ongoing to learn about more of the organization, as well as the website itself you can go to. But again, it primarily serves people who maintain and develop research software and those interested in RSE careers, so even early career stage folks. Maybe you're mentoring some students and they are still exploring where they might be wanting to go after grad school or whenever they get their terminal degree. And this could be a great organization for them to at least get their feet wet and learn about the types of opportunities within RSE versus, say, other academic routes or other routes in industry for them to explore and learn about in a meaningful way. We also welcome anyone that identifies themselves as RSE allies. So feel free to encourage any domain science colleagues that may use software or may or may not then also develop said software alongside you to even join themselves and learn about some of the values of software engineering in terms of how that serves their research interests. So the main goals of USRC is to build community and advocate for RSC's needs and serving the goals of research software servicing the research enterprise. And then as well as then developing, collecting, and curating various resources for folks to access and learn from and share with each other, as well as promoting DEI within the organization towards, as well as externally towards encouraging meaningful inclusion of all folks that might be interested in engaging in this career field. So they offer multiple activities and spaces. I already mentioned the Slack space, which I find highly valuable in terms of the level of activity that our organization has within their Slack. And they also have annual conferences now, as well as workshops and community calls and newsletters, and even a podcast that's updated semi-regularly, as well as then working groups you can join. I can speak a little bit more later on the annual conference as well. That'll be in Albuquerque later this year. I'm actually chairing the student committee for that, so feel free to ask any questions later if you have any interest in engaging with that particular event. So just to highlight the mission succinctly for the USRC is essentially focusing on community, advocacy, resources, and DEI, as I just mentioned before. So, and these are the current emphasis and focus of the organization, but you're welcome to engage further and learn about the other types of initiatives and work that connect back to these mission points towards ways in which you might fit into how you can meaningfully engage with furthering the RSC kind of goals and missions, and hopefully what you might see for yourself out of having an effective research software engineering kind of enterprise and work for not only your needs, but then the people you collaborate with. So to highlight some opportunities to engage, I think one I might focus on the most are the working groups. So they have monthly community calls that are organized through one of the groups there. I know through the SEA here at NCAR, we've had some discussions on code review, and there's a similar working group there in USRC that focuses on code review best practices and has various discussions and themed ideas about how we might encourage better practices around code review. There's a DEI group, there's a education and training. They offer various training and engagement opportunities that anyone can join, whether you're a USRC member or not. Those that are interested in group management, which is primarily managing the working groups within USRC, but does have occasional discussions on project management goals and say managers within organizations that manage RSCs and how that might play out for doing that effectively. There's also mentorship outreach programs, discussions in working group. So there's goals to enable USRCs to engage more effectively in mentorship opportunities, and that might include other external ones that are already offered, say through Access, like the CCMNet program. This is one of the Campus Champions mentorship network. And then there's an outreach group for just external outreach in general. One that might focus specifically, be of interest to most of us here would be the RSC Empowerment and National Lab, so addressing specific concerns for software engineering within the National Lab context, which I would argue definitely includes ourselves here at NCAR. And then there's a group that talks about testing specifically in terms of technical aspects of like best practices within software engineering, and what type of testing kind of goals and needs are most prescient and needed for work within the research enterprise context, as well as then user experience and managing the USRC website overall. There's also then regional affinity groups. We even have like an affinity group for the Front Range, Colorado area. There hasn't been too many recent events. I believe one of the main people that used to organize a lot of them actually moved down to Florida. So if you're interested actually specifically engaging in organizing more local events, that would be one to actually engage in. One thing I will at least emphasize, at least with the RC Empowerment National Labs, that's one I am actively engaged in typically. This past year and recently at the Improving Scientific Software Conference, I did give a talk on a focus group we kind of did amongst National Lab RSC identified folks in terms of their needs in that space. So if you're interested in seeing what I talked about there at that event, you can follow that link there. One thing maybe to emphasize is like many RSCs currently in national labs, they're often aligned within project-oriented how their jobs are assigned and roles that take place within the organizations. But there are discussions in terms of like how to coordinate work better across the organization. For example, many organizations, as was cited in that focus group, don't have clear software engineering standards and practices that are expected across the organization. So there's some interest in trying to maybe figure out through those focus groups we had by those RSCs to identify what might be best practices that national labs might share within each other, and as well as then maybe with external collaborations in terms of what expectations are we setting towards testing requirements, licensing requirements, managing version control, continuous integration type work, all the sort of like, what minimal standards do we have around documentation, I would think is very important. Some of those things aren't well defined in many organizations, and doing some of the work here within USRC can help perhaps bring back some information to NCAR or other places you might engage with about what might best serve your own needs. So if you want to learn more, feel free to go to the Get Involved link here. And so there's ways in which you can learn more about these opportunities. And then if you want to even form a new working group beyond those that are listed here, there is an established process to do that. And so there's a page there that you can follow to find more information on that. So to highlight some resources that are suggested directly by USRC, as well as some of my own that I'll add at the end here, there is an actual job board that has had higher rates of adoption. So if you are looking to add more members to your team, or maybe you have a supervisor that's planning to do that process relatively soon, you might suggest them to share those opportunities on said job board. We also have regular newsletters you can subscribe to. And there's a RSC resources page that actually highlights some of these that I've already highlighted here, plus some others that they intend to regularly update and add to in terms of what best serves the USRC community. Some specific reports even that would be useful to highlight here that members of the RSC community have put out there include how do folks get started with building an RSC movement at their organization, identifying and creating career paths for RSCs, as well as like hiring and managing and kind of like HR issues within research software engineers in academia. Another one that was actually done by Visa and not necessarily by USRC was like resources for supporting policy changes in research institutions around supporting RSCs. And so navigating how do we make this incremental changes within often bureaucratic and slow to change organizations is important towards figuring out how do we convince folks to buy into this process. And there's useful discussions in these reports to learn about that. Some other additional resources, especially I would say highlighting some of the initiatives in open science. There's the Center for Open Science, COS.io, and their open science framework that offers some ways in which to suggest best practices around developing software that is accessible and meeting standards like FAIR that I mentioned earlier. Recently, it was even offered within the USRC Slack this Open Source Science for Climate podcast. It was offered by the Sustain Open Source Science organization. Another one that I find important that I would like to engage with more myself is thinking more about like software energy consumption, which might also relate to the Energy Efficiency HPC Working Group out of the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And another one I like in terms of just thinking about your own role within developing software is this article out of Aalto in Finland in the Zen of Scientific Computing. So if you're interested in just thinking about what sort of like it's difficult to do everything at once in terms of, say, it's like I want to add testing to my software. I want to add make my documentation more accessible. I want to add a user interface to allow like non-technical folks to use my work. All those things take a lot of time and effort from a human person on the back end to build these things. And I think figuring out, I think that Zen article there, for example, goes through a lot of these, like how do we prioritize these goals and figure out what is most valuable in that process and allow you to reflect on that in a meaningful way. Encourage you to explore some of these resources as you might deem valuable at this point. But to highlight some of those specific reports, they are actually like pretty robust reports that you can look into. So this USRC and American Data Science Association Career Support Workshop developed this hiring and managing and retaining data scientists in RSCs and academia. So this was actually, I think it's a 130-page report. So if you want to get into a lot of the nitty-gritty details of some of these best practices and a lot of effort and time put into detailing some of this work, very much encourage you to explore that as it might be related to you. So some of the highlights from the report focus on highlighting needs for mentorship and community. HR resource management of RSCs, for example, is discussed. Navigating funding environments, there's often hard issues being explored and related about soft funding versus hard funding for projects and software engineers, and how do we navigate that effectively, or which might be better in certain circumstances. And there's even some example job posting descriptions, in terms of like, how do we, communicate the types of roles and issues we're wanting future workforce that we're hiring to meet in terms of the types of roles you might be hiring for in the future. So if you're interested in any of those sort of areas, I encourage exploring that report. The other one was in partnership with the IEEE Computer Society. This is only a 25-page report, so it's a little bit easier to navigate. But this one just focuses on, again, why software engineering as a dedicated career. So distinguishing that separately from other career paths people might be considering. I think this is very presently important, just as my own experience while in grad school, where it was difficult to my advisors who were in the math and environmental science kind of like space to see the value of me even exploring high performance computing as like a valuable and worthwhile endeavor and opportunity to even dive into. If you have like collaborators or students you're working with and such that maybe do not have advisors or people at their institution that are familiar with the RSC space, this can identify some ways in which for people to think differently about the types of opportunities available to them beyond just a postdoc or other types of opportunities that might be standard in most academic institutions presently. This report also assesses the ongoing evolution of RSC roles and ways in which we might envision that future or anticipate some of those changes that are up and coming, as well as then identifying like how individuals build careers in RSCs. So what basic skills should you acquire, using GitHub version control, for example, and emphasizing those sort of skills as being priority or not as priority, but still, putting that on a list for folks to keep in mind as they're maybe they're going through school or programs or wanting to transition from a domain science to RSCs, and they want to figure out like what exactly they might need to develop more of. And this can be a great guide in which to learn about those resources and spaces of what's needed by them as they maybe learn to discover that they like the software engineering side of their work, as well as then the opportunities and the groups and conferences they might be able to engage with through the same, some of which I've already shared with you before earlier in this presentation. So Many RSC professionals, as quoted in this book, in this report, will tell you the greatest benefit of working in the RSC world is the community. So, and I would heartily agree. I think the greatest benefit that we can have in terms of furthering the issues that are becoming more and more present within science, as science depends on research software, is that the best way to do this work better is to build effective communities and collaborations and relationships with each other, having these meaningful discussions about what best serves our interests and needs of not only ourselves as software engineers, but hopefully over time, including scientists that may not have that software engineering background in those same discussions, to help educate and bring forward the value that RSCs brings to the work that we do. Final point that I emphasize here is a report we actually developed in the Empowerment and National Labs Working Group. Again, this just emphasizes building communities, as I just said, and raising awareness about RSCs. How do we recruit allies, and how do we recognize RSCs and their contributions? There are often issues in terms of like the standard practice in which we acknowledge and recognize folks within science as to measure number of publications or workshop presentations and such, and there's less a clear value add in terms of how people think about it, of like what value is being added when you publish software and actually develop the code and that sort of work. It's less clear still in many organizations, and I think even within NCAR at certain groups, what value is there in equity even in terms of like the work being contributed towards developing the software, as well as also publishing the work that depends on that software. And so these sort of issues are discussed in this report as well. And how do we nurture these affinity groups, both formally and informally, to advance some of these sort of issues? And then lastly, sustaining the above. It's very difficult as we're building out some of these grassroots groups, so to speak, in terms of over time as we become larger and larger. How do we argue for and gain financial support for that work? We would like to make sure that we can retain folks that have the skills necessary to do a meaningful and valuable software development for science. And if we don't have a clear way to provide sustainable funding for that work, that can be a non-starter down the line in terms of making sure that we can keep the value work going moving forward. So at least to highlight, at least through some funding and award opportunities, at least within USRC, thanks to Alpha Sloan Foundation, there are actually some community and travel funds available. There are two categories, at least within that, primarily those that serve the community. So like, so you want to organize an event that brings together groups of RSCs and folks, and typically that would be able to earn more money for that opportunity. There's also, say if you want to give a presentation about RSCs or some sort of engagement that relates to research software engineering, but you might primarily just need support for the individual, say for like a travel reimbursement to a workshop or conference. Those are opportunities that you can apply for to receive funding. There's even the community awards you can be nominated for or nominate others on in terms of recognizing significant contributions to RSC work. And then for leadership or folks that might be considering large project proposals, there's even a funder seminar series that was held and presently is on hiatus, but there are recordings and slides from all those seminars as given, with various talks from like the, forgetting what the acronym ASCR stands for, it's the Office of Science, Scientific Computing Research Group, as well as an NSF, Sloan Foundation, Chan Zuckerberg Foundation, Schmidt Futures, and other groups that are interested in funding RSC type work. So if you have any questions in that type of area, feel free to email that alias to the side, or you can even, if you can join the Community Grants Slack channel that exists in the Slack itself. So as some final things to emphasize, we have also some upcoming conferences and events that you might be interested in. There's the USRC conference in Albuquerque in October that I mentioned earlier. I'm currently leading the student committee, so we're planning to have some mentor-mentee matching programs, as well as some a tour of the University of New Mexico nearby data center for students to engage with and learn about that space. There'll also be a student poster session that would be a part of the program. And for students that are participating, we plan to offer volunteer opportunities that would then provide such students with free or reduced registration rates. We're still sorting out some of those details, but nonetheless, if you enjoy working with students and would like to help out with that, we always would appreciate additional subcommittee volunteers in that space. But there's also other roles or ways in which you can engage in terms of helping out with that conference if you so like. Nonetheless, there's also many other like conferences and such that have and workshops that have opportunities that relate to research software engineering. So actually this week, there's a cyber infrastructure virtual residency workshop out of University of Oklahoma. Primarily they focus on how do folks provide support and cyber infrastructure for people doing science work. And so there's many discussions in that space you're welcome to explore. The PERC conference in July has had many RSC type discussions over the years. I do not recall a specific RSC, US RSC session this year. I know there was one last year, but there's certainly still plenty of discussions that are relevant to types of concerns you might have. If you are interested in the DEI space, there is a upcoming webinar at the end of July about from the diverse group about EDIA and RSC. And internationally, there are other groups, such if you happen to be traveling in the area during the time. For example, there's one in September in the UK. There's a HPC RSC BOF there. But there's also an HPC RSC BOF and workshop happening at SC24. So if you're already planning to go to that, you might be interested to look more into that and submit a lightning talk by the August 2nd deadline for that. There's also the Science Gateways Conference in Bozeman, Montana. Again, they develop hubs and interfaces for people to interact with science use. So for example, like the Open On Demand project, for example, is related to Science Gateways. And again, there's monthly community calls, and there's a calendar of events you can subscribe to learn about other upcoming events. Some past events, just to at least be aware of, is there's often other international RSC groups now have their own conferences. So the German RSC group has a conference they do yearly now, and IEEE has an e-science conference series that actually has been going on for many, many years. That has similar intersections with RSC type work, and I believe that last year, 2 years ago, it was in Utah and had quite a large showing from USRC at that time. And one to highlight, again, on the DEI space, there's a RSC workshop on Viva la Defense held in the Netherlands in 2022. Part of the CISL DEI group that I was working with at the time, we did put together a summary and takeaways specifically from that workshop. So thinking about also how do we do inclusive code review and best practices, for example, with some of the discussions at that workshop. So you can think about the ways in which that we are standardizing some of the technical aspects of RSC type work, such that it enables people to engage meaningfully and holistically. It can be important things to consider as well in terms of types of discussions that take place in the RSC community. So overall, the RSC movement is still growing. We recently, as I said, passed the 2,500 mark in terms of US membership. Whether or not all those members are still currently active, that's still an active discussion. Since it is free, it is easy to join, but I do not know if down the line it would become paid or not membership. But for the time being, it is an active and growing group. And so, and seeing all that just mentioned earlier, I hopefully at least to give you some ideas about finding where you might fit in, and perhaps even then invite others to join in terms of either the USRC group or maybe even other groups you might find valuable as well, perhaps given your interests. So I would just employ you during any such discernment of how you might get engaged in this community and furthering the work and needs of you yourself as might identify as a research software engineer, or any of your colleagues that engage at the same. Be sure to understand first what you actually need, and definitely ask your colleagues then what they need as well. So you can figure out how do we collaborate better. This is the whole goal of this type of movement, is what sort of needs do we have, and what gaps need to be filled in terms of making science better for with using research software in a meaningful way, and how do we make sure that the folks that are doing that work are recognized and acknowledged accordingly, and actually supported through that beyond what how they are currently acknowledged at present. So I thank you for your time in terms of learning about the RSC type movement, and would welcome any of your questions. You can reach out to me via email, or if you do join, feel free to add me in the Slack channels of USRC. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Any questions? I can get the ball rolling. Or do we have any online? No, Thomas?
I think you mentioned the national organization. What about local, I mean, SCA and joining that?
Well, yeah, certainly.
I felt that was a little missing as part of the last message. So I think encouraging people to localize and organize, because I think there's power in numbers, right? If you voice your concerns in numbers and are active, I think there's power there. Just a comment.
Well, I certainly agree. The Software Engineering Assembly, which has actually been around at NCAR for quite a while, I believe is very much intersectional with RSC type work. So yeah, like that is already established, and feel free to engage with that further. I believe Brian, Sherry, and Jesse help lead that predominantly mostly. And actually, Brian right now is actually giving a presentation on that during the same seminar to the National Lab Empowerment Group at USRSC. So we're all trying to learn from each other in terms of like best ways in doing that, because like Sandia, Lawrence Livermore, and Berkeley, they have their own type of software engineering related groups that aren't necessarily named RSC within their titles, but I think we all very much have shared interests and want to support each other, and SCA can be one of those ways to coalesce that better within NCAR.
We have an online question from Doug. Thanks for the informative talk. Can you describe the path that led to your career as an RSE?
Yeah. So I think during grad school, I think I became very much interested in Earth system science in terms of like the ways in which I could apply like mathematical expertise in that space. And as I was working through that work and development, I was more and more relying on supercomputing and like HPC resources to do that work. And over time, I was just like going to more and more workshops and training opportunities and events to get those skills that were not necessarily offered at my institution. And through that work and developing those skills, I sought out a career to do that. I think there was like an international HPC summer school I remember going to, and that was actually held here in Boulder in 2017. And then the following year, I ended up doing an internship with the K supercomputer in Kobe, Japan. So that was very much like how I kind of approached it from like the HPC side, which is a common theme within the RSC community of high performance computing being a commonality between identity of folks. But nonetheless, I think just as I mentioned earlier, there's just a little bit of difficulty in terms of like the goals like that my advisors in grad school had around like the domain science work they're wanting to do. And I was like, well, this like, how do we do this more effectively? And the supercomputer you're using, I think is really important to me and something that I want to learn more about, but it was hard to navigate those conversations with my advisors. And admittedly at the time, I had to like seek out those resources myself, which I find kind of unfortunate. And I wish that there was more communities like SCA and USRC at the time that was available to more folks to provide this education and opportunities and learning about the types of careers available beyond just HPC, because it's not just HPC as well. There's people in data science now. There's people that work the cyber infrastructure and the system administration of clusters and such, or any other spaces in the same. There's lots of new opportunities in terms of that space. So yeah, wasn't necessarily a linear trajectory, but I don't think most people's careers are. So.
That's true. There's no one clear path for any of us. Appreciate that.
So I guess related to the career path, I'm wondering if any of these references you suggested talk about, is research software engineering something that you can do with a bachelor's degree, or do most people have a master's or PhD, or like what does that look like, and how is your path change based on how much schooling you want to do or don't want to do?
Right. Well, I think that's definitely like an ongoing discussion in terms of like, the type of expectations that are placed upon people entering RSE roles. I think there's still, from the reports I've read, like there's an intersection at least with like how software engineering even has been approached like before RSE existed in a sense, that often never even required bachelor's degrees. So like if people had experience in that space, I think people were relatively open and centering that work. In terms of like allowing someone to join a group. Within RSC community, for example, there's a lot of folks that say like didn't finish their PhD or mastered out or got into scientific work and wanted to do that further, but from the software engineering context. And so navigating that and like how maybe like changing some of the standards in some organizations around like do we require a PhD or not for some of these roles? It's not all organizations do that, but some are still requiring that. So it's a definitely variable across institutions. Maybe as a final point to make there is just like the, I lost my train of thought, so I'll just stop there. But
So this might sound like a stupid question, but I'm really curious. You are in CISL, right, in the HPC consultants, and do you identify as a software engineer, and are we organized the right way? I mean, I'm really curious to understand, and I think Brian too, right? Brian is in that space too. How does that fit together? I'm just curious on your view.
Sounds like Ben wants to chime in first.
I'll let you.
Oh,
Self-identify, and then we talk organization history, I guess. Right?
Yeah. Well, I think actually, so when I was first hired, I think I was classified as a software engineer, and I think a year and a half later, I was reclassified as HPC consultant.
But I think that was the dysfunction of the job classification space at NCAR. I mean, I need a microphone. Maybe I don't need a microphone for this comment. But I think I know about this because I worked actually in this job category space, and I met a lot of times with NCAR folks. And I was always wondering why there were so many software engineers, and it was really because of they didn't have job categories for it in that space. So I think I understand that part. But I'm still curious on your personal identification and.
Well, I think to add to that a little bit is like the so yes, as an HPC consultant, I'm definitely more like I think by role identity. I'm more like meant in a support role of like other science projects. So often like, diagnosing and troubleshooting and going through like various issues people report. And I often get spread, honestly, sometimes very thin. There's just like the various different types of like issues I have to address and have to be like kind of like more of a generalist in many ways, which is honestly kind of why I was in applied math in the first place, because I like to apply math to many different things. So learning about all the different types of tools and issues, I think is something that at least interests me. Nonetheless, like I still identify as an RSC, but I don't necessarily do as much direct software engineering development in the sense of like, contributing to like a full-on code base. Maybe like I develop some like scripts and things or helping support, the software that we install for systems or, I've been doing a lot of work, at least like on the side as much as I can with like a porting GPU projects and such. But like, my time is kind of limited in terms of being able to like do maybe more RSC, like what I would consider more like specifically RSC work where I'm actually doing the software engineering side of things rather than like in the cyber infrastructure support side of things. But like that's part of like, I think any job role, you always have to navigate like the community aspect as well as like actual technical aspect of a project and like how you are, managing your time across different things. So not necessarily sure if that's just a HPC consultant type issue thing, or if it's just like, it makes me question, for example, at least like the how we distinguish between like the goals of like RSCs, or I think they're more classified as SEs in the ASAP group versus like the HPC consultants in my group. But yeah, maybe Ben wants to add there.
Yeah, I would say, back to some of the intro slides you had where they prefer an inclusive membership definition of the RSE, right? Like the HPC consultant is not the PI of PETSI, right? You're not singularly focused on to the extreme on a software package, whereas that is, a valid role for a research software engineer, but much more broad and supporting a large toolkit to less depth than any single individual tool. But it does draw on a common set of skills, and it's just applied, I think, more in a broad base across a number of tools based on user needs than a long-term singular focus on a single package or capability.
And then I'll go ahead and ask a question.
Mhm.
What are some of the things you've appreciated most from joining these organizations?
I think I've enjoyed like the kind of camaraderie there, just like the sense of like people identifying and sharing like the similar issues like I'm navigating. I think in terms of like as like NCAR is slowly changing and like I remember like when I shifted from like my SE title to HPC consultant title, like it's still kind of like nascent and a little bit confusing at times in terms of like where I actually fit in within like the research enterprise because I wanted to be in science because I enjoy that work, but nonetheless there's still a feeling that software engineering is like a second-class citizen to like the scientists, even though I have like a scientist's background in terms of like some of my training. But nonetheless, it's having these organizations that I've joined and get engaged with just has helped me like just share those kind of concerns and learn about like that like I'm not the only one there in terms of like having trouble navigating this space, and it's been helpful learning from each other about ways in which I can also do my own science better or work better, and like I personally would like to prioritize better documentation practices, and it's I think it's been definitely appreciated that like there's more and more resources being shared and discussed and encouraged within the RC organization, for example, to prioritize that type of like issue when other times it's like less prioritized, honestly, just given the goal to publish versus the goal to document the software that enabled that publication.